So I recently signed up to do something for the very first time. It's something kind of outside of my comfort zone. I signed up to be a coach for a team of fourth graders for Odyssey of the Mind. If you're not familiar, Odyssey of the Mind is an extracurricular school activity where you're on a team with other kids your age working to develop a creative solution to a very broadly defined problem. So it's team-based creative problem solving, basically. And there's a final competition in which your team presents your solution to a problem as an 8-minute performance. Now, I've always been really a people person to the core, but I've never considered myself a kid person. I love children, I have children, I really value children, but the realm of childhood has never been my comfort zone. I've always been more comfortable in the company of adults, really even as a child. So I've been asking myself lately, why on earth did I sign up to coach this team? Now, I could tell you a lot of reasons for this, and they would all be true. But the other day I had an aha. My desire to be involved in my own kids' fourth grade Odyssey of the Mind experience probably bears some relationship to my own fourth grade experience in the same program. Do you want to know what my primary Odyssey of the Mind memory is? It's one of those memories that's really, really clear because I must have revisited it a million times for some reason. The memory is this. We were creating a performance that had a clown theme. And all of the kids on the team were really stumped about what to name a country that is home to clowns. And then I had this insight and I shouted out, Czechoslovakia. And this one girl on the team, who we'll call Anne, she just laughed. She proclaimed that I was brilliant. And for that one moment, Anne shone her favor on me. And this was very significant because for the rest of the time, Anne pretty much alternated between tolerating me and hating my guts. Anne was very smart and very pretty, with long blonde hair and expensive name brand clothes. Anne was a powerful personality. One of her signature moves was that when we had a substitute teacher, Anne would routinely organize the entire class to do something that would humiliate and confuse the substitute. So she'd pass around a note, for example, with a specific time for all the students to start coughing or all stand up and go sharpen our pencils. And the subs always looked like they wanted to cry. Anne was in my class at school. She was on my Odyssey of the Mind team, and she was friends with basically all my friends. So when Anne was not there, playing with my friends was relaxed and fun. But whenever Anne was present, she held power in that group, and she set the rules. If she laughed, we laughed. If she rejected something or rejected someone, well, then it just wasn't worthy. The trouble was that I was the person who was often being rejected. I could not really figure out why. It seemed to have something to do with me being too loud, too enthusiastic, too silly, too big, too unrefined, too weird. I'll never know why I was the target of her eye rolls and sarcasm, why I was the conspicuous not receiver of certain invitations. I was the person who was definitely trying the hardest to please Anne, but I always fell short. I desperately tried to identify what was wrong with me so that I could root it out and eliminate it, and then Anne would accept me. But none of my strategies worked. Not the detailed map of popularity of every kid in my grade that I'd curated in my mind for the sole purpose of checking how my ranking compared to other people's. Not the hyper focus on acquiring name brand clothing or getting my bangs just right. Not the dieting to get my taller, larger body to become something smaller and more ideal. Not the observing and mimicking other kids, trying to learn how to get it right, to weed out whatever it was that was so wrong with me. So I think I volunteered to coach this team because on some level, I wanted to protect my younger 4th grade bullied self and protect my current 4th grade kids somehow. I wanted to protect my daughter from one of my shame stories. Shame comes in all shapes and sizes. Shame is so human and it is so awful. We humans are wired for love and belonging. It's a core part of our humanity and our soul. And so feeling totally unworthy of love and belonging is a suffering like nothing else. Shame feels like there's something fundamentally wrong with us, like we're defective, like there's something intrinsic about us that places us outside the circle of worthiness. Shame is different from guilt because guilt says that we did something bad, and shame says that we just are bad. We aren't born with shame. Shame builds slowly and it runs deep. In his book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, Francis Weller compares the way that shame takes root to that common high school chemistry experiment of making rock candy, that confection of lumpy, crystallized sugar on a string. Weller writes, the experiment involves taking a glass of water and tying a string to a pencil and placing it in the glass of water. And then we slowly add sugar to the water, creating a solution. And nothing happens, nothing happens. And then when the saturation point is reached, the sugar molecules begin to crystallize around the string. And that is how it is with shame. We can endure a certain number of times when the connection is broken between us and the people we love and need. We can digest a certain volume of disappointments and criticism. But at some point, with enough repetition, the internal stories associated with those events, they reach a saturation point, and fictions crystallize into things that feel like truths. With shame, we internalize fictions and experience them as truths. That we aren't lovable, that we're responsible for the bad thing that happened, that we can never do anything right, or that we simply don't matter as much as other people. And we end up with a sense of some stain on our soul that if we ever shared it, if we ever let it see the light of day or talked about it, we would be utterly rejected, cast out, even somehow annihilated. Our fear of exposure moves us to bury our shame stories way down. Those stories of abandonment, rejection, violation, or cruelty. And we may be able to bury it deep enough to silence the shame most of the time. Yet our shame still haunts us, and we know it's there. Shame is the worst kind of ghost. And the awful truth is that shame actually thrives underground. Shame loves being buried. It loves that secrecy. Shame gets stronger in the dark, whispering to us to push people away, to lash out, to talk to ourselves or treat ourselves in punishing ways. And so we get just stuck in this shame place, feeling terrified to be exposed for how unacceptable we truly are. And yet we are also so deeply longing to be seen with compassion and understanding. And this is a place where we can get stuck sometimes for years or for a whole lifetime, not wanting to be exposed, but also just desperate to feel really seen and loved. I think This shame stuckness is a place that a lot of us are encountering this fall, when I see so many of us feeling on edge, feeling the ghosts of last year's COVID winter encroaching and wondering what this year will bring, feeling our animal selves hunkering down in response to the dwindling light and colder temperatures. And it is hard out there right now. People getting up in the faces of healthcare workers and educators and school board members with pushback about vaccines and masks, just blowing their stress and frustration into others. I know that here in our Foothills community, we've been grieving big losses and living with maladies of mind, body, and spirit. This fall has been hard for so many of us. And this can really kick up our old familiar shame stories. Those voices that tell us that we're not good enough, that we don't really belong, that what we're feeling is our fault. These are the shame ghosts that are haunting us. But there's good news, and the good news is that there is something to be done. But it might just be the last thing you want to do. Shame resilience begins with sharing our story. Shame loses its power when we pull back the curtains and let in the light of day. Shame cannot stand having words put to it and being spoken aloud. Shame just shrinks up and withers when someone else moves in to help us hold the story with compassion. This move of naming and sharing our shame, it can feel like an absolute impossibility because our shame tells us the lie that we're defective and it's the worst possible thing to potentially expose ourselves. Someone might find out about us. But when we feel our shame activated and flared up, when something happens and we feel our throat constrict and we feel that sinking feeling in our gut and we just want to go hide in a hole, the best way to cast it out is to find someone safe and trustworthy to name it with. Busting up our shame looks like talking about it, describing all its pieces and feelings in the presence of someone who can listen to us deeply and talk through it in order to help us break that shame down and diffuse its power. Someone who can hold complexity, someone who knows us for both our struggles and challenges and our resilience and power, someone we trust. I want to note here that taking this leap can be so terrifying and feel tremendously awkward. And it can take a lot of time and practice and self-compassion and false starts and do-overs. And I know it's easy for me to just stand here and make this radical suggestion, but you are worth it. You deserve to live a robust and joyful and open-hearted life. You are so much more than the lies of your shame stories. Sharing our shame, it's not only life-giving and relieving and courageous. Sharing our shame saves lives. In a world racked with depression and anxiety and pandemic pain and climate anguish, the world needs us to practice making it okay to talk about shame. Because the alternative is being shackled to lies that diminish and immobilize us, and that doesn't serve anyone or anything. Every time we put our words to our shame, we are also modeling for someone else that is another way, that we are also a safe person for naming and diffusing shame with. I think of the friend that I call regularly to share my worst moments. In fact, I just called her this week in a spell of feeling inadequate and embarrassed and like I couldn't do anything right. And I realized that she's the person I call in those moments because basically she went first and showed me the ropes. She plunged into the deep end of the pool first and she shared her demons with me, for which truly I had only compassion. And I felt so honored that she would share so vulnerably with me, that she would trust me. And eventually I realized that I probably couldn't scare her off if I shared with her what was on my heart too. And do you know what happened? What happened was a deeper friendship that became a place where we could both ghost bust the demons that haunt us. And together we have practiced creating this force field that unmasks shame and hateful self-talk just for the sham that it is. It's a life-giving practice. This is a life-giving practice every time we put words to our shame. We practice dismantling dehumanizing lies that are keeping us paralyzed and small. When we talk about the elephant in the room of our soul, only to discover that we did not die from humiliation and horror, but that we're still here, feeling exposed and astonished and relieved, we start to see that there are so many other elephants to be named, and that speaking our truth, the truth of our experience, it's powerful. It's a kind of fuel that diminishes regimes, that gives people a reason to live. Shame just has no use, and it's everywhere. And as Unitarian Universalists, we just can't stand for it. It's against our religion to tolerate shaming, because we know we are all worthy. You are worthy. We're each worthy. And we each have an essential connection to that big sacred everything that no one can mess with. No one can touch that sacred spark. Let us be the people who have a practice of putting words to our shame. Let us be that people who are called to never tolerate shaming. Not in our schools, not in our families, not on social media, not by our elected officials or public servants. Let us be a people who live each day anchored in the conviction that every soul is sacred and squarely located within the circle of worthiness. Before I wrap up today, I thought you might want to know where the story with Anne ended. In the 6th grade, I was getting ready one night for a sleepover with my group of friends, and I got a phone call informing me that I was not invited to the sleepover after all. I never imagined that this could actually happen. And so I cried and I cried. I remember my mom being really sweet with me. And I now know that she was also overflowing with maternal rage. And the next day at school, I didn't have a lunch table to sit at anymore. I'd been totally dumped by my group of friends. So I walked over to another table of girls from my music class, and I explained to them that there wasn't a place for me on my old lunch table, and I asked if I could sit with them. And they smiled and showed me a chair. Over the course of the week, I eventually told them everything that happened about the phone call, the bullying, how it always felt so worthless around Anne. And they were so kind. They made a place for me at the table, quite literally, welcomed me in, and I began my journey of finding my people, which included lots of dead ends and surprises, but it was always better than desperately striving to please. It was always better than the unwinnable, unfigure-outable conundrum of what was wrong with me. You are worthy. You are beautiful. You are worthy. This is our truth. We are all in this together, doing the holy work of casting out shame and calling in compassion. May it be so. Amen.